Welcome to the LinkedIn LeapGreat live session. We have people joining from around the world, and we'd love to hear from you in the chat. If you could, make any comments there, tell us where you're from, that'd be great. Our discussion topic today is navigating the largest implementation exodus in history. I'm your host, Ross Orrett. I've had the privilege of building several software companies for the enterprise, including one that SAP acquired in 2013. And through my active investing and board positions, including LeapGreat, I've had the opportunity to see the evolution of ERP over multiple decades. I am joined today by Bob Cummings, CEO of LeapGreat, and a 30-year veteran of SAP. We will start with some proactive questions, and then I'll try to pose some of your questions that you can enter in the chat. So Bob, tell me about what you did at SAP as it relates to this migration coming up. You're a veteran of SAP. What you did at SAP as it relates to this migration coming up. You're a veteran of SAP.
Yeah, hey, Ross, I think there's a real echo on your side. I'm sorry, can you hear me okay?
You are coming through for us. I will see if we can attempt to adjust this echo.
Yours is coming through as an echo for me, although I don't know if it's me or you. So, Ross, I think there's a real echo on your side. I'm sorry, can you hear me okay?
You are coming through for us. I will see if we can attempt to adjust this echo.
Yours is coming through as an echo for me, although I don't know if it's me or you. So, Ross, I think there's a real echo on your side. Okay. So can you hear me okay?
Bob, just to kill any LinkedIn attendee, part that you had running in parallel. That may have been it. We have had a browser.
Better? Is that better?
Yes. My apologies to those on the line if that didn't come through. I was just, joined today by Bob Cummings, CEO of LeapGreat, who's a 30-year veteran of SAP. And we'll start with some proactive questions, then I'll try to pose some of your questions that you're free to enter in the comments box. So Bob, tell me about what you did at SAP and as it relates to this huge migration coming up.
Yeah, thank you, Ross, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. Apologize for the technical glitches there at the beginning. I started doing SAP implementations right out of college in the summer of 1990, implementing SAP R2 at the first SAP customers in North America. I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. We had a very steep learning curve in those days, and I guess I kind of got hooked on SAP because I've spent the last almost 35 years doing SAP, both in the ecosystem and at SAP itself, where I spent 27 years in a variety of roles, from consulting to development and industry management to de-escalation support, as well as being a board assistant for several running strategic projects. At the time, I was responsible in the day for the move programs from R2 installed base to R3, and then again from R3 to ECC. And now I'm excited about the move from ECC to SAP S/4HANA. So maybe it's third time lucky.
That sounds great. And so why did you leave SAP, Bob?
Well, when I was at SAP, I was very blessed to be able to work with really many talented people. But there was a special group of very experienced consultants and engineers who were very focused on trying to make ERP easier to implement. And I actually joined this group, who also left at the same time to start LeapGreat. They're definitely some of the most experienced and passionate SAP people I've ever seen, much more experienced than me. One gentleman on our team even implemented the SAP R1 system in the very early days, the first SAP ERP system, working with Hasso Plattner and Dietmar Hopp at the very first SAP customers. So we left SAP together, not because we were unhappy at SAP. In fact, we were very happy and all having actually a really wonderful time at SAP. It was just we still today have a great passion and energy for SAP, but we saw an opportunity to solve an age-old problem at a time when thousands of customers are looking for help to move to the next generation of SAP ERP, which is SAP S/4HANA. And So over the years, this team had the opportunity of interacting with hundreds of companies, and we noticed that this old problem still lingers on. If you Google ERP project risk statistics, you'll see that there are some very sobering statistics about how more than half of ERP projects run over time, over budget, and even fail or cause massive disruption. This is nothing new. This has been a problem for as long as I can remember. Executives we have spoken to over the years lament how complex and expensive ERP projects are, and are often extremely concerned about the risk of these projects, and very often push the decision to upgrade far into the future. That is, in fact, one reason why there's such a huge backlog of tens of thousands of customers who still need to upgrade. And this team has been working for many years on how to reduce that risk and solve that problem. What we noticed was that the problem had nothing really to do with the SAP software or even the quality of the implementation teams. It has to do with something in the nature of ERP projects. ERP projects are not like discrete CRM or HR projects. ERP really touches every part of the enterprise. And so with a line of sight to this mass migration of ERP upgrades, we founded LeapGreat to create a platform to resolve this problem using a new approach, leveraging some modern automation and AI technologies to make this possible. And we hope that this will help not only customers, but also help SAP and even the system implementers.
That's interesting that you I caught up on that word that you said, risk and around that, because often when I hear people talk about software, they get excited about the technology, and they often don't talk about the impacts to business and the risk. What do you mean by that? What's the risk, and maybe what's the root cause?
Yeah, so I think when you look at the root cause of these things, I think when you look at so there's actually many things that happen sort of at the same time when you look at the root cause of this. So when you talk to a project manager and you say, what is the what is it that makes these projects difficult, they'll say things like, well, it could be the misalignment between IT, but in our experience, it might be IT and business. The timelines are aggressive, underestimating data migration and stuff. But in our experience, there's one big root cause for the risk in these projects, which result in those other things that you read about in the literature and that you see in the internet. The fact is that on most projects, the first half of the project is very conceptual. We try to help a customer imagine, visualize, and conceptualize the future state. We draw pictures of target architectures, of process capabilities. We show demos, proof of concepts, and so on, and to try and help the customer visualize a future state. And then one day, the real target system begins to emerge, and this is where the project suddenly shifts gears into reality. It's no longer conceptual, it's now real. And in our experience of escalations, this is the point in the project where the rubber meets the road and all sorts of surprises come up. You hear people say, oh, that's how the system works, that's not how we expected. Where's our field XYZ, or who forgot to add this? And in our experience, this is exactly where the project begins to escalate, or sometimes go into a tailspin and follow the pattern we see in the analyst statistics. We believe from our experience with implementations and escalations, the root cause of many problems is the really late visibility of the customer's working system reality.
That's interesting. So if late visibility of the working system is critical, wouldn't just vendor demos or implementers POCs or things like that work just as well?
Well, demos and proof of concepts of model companies definitely do help. We did a lot of these at SAP, and they're valuable to help visualize the system possibilities, but they don't solve the main problem of the project, to integrate all the many streams of work, like from architecture to processes to data to all the different things that have to come, and which is the first real working system, to bring everyone toward that first real working system based on the customer's full scope processes and data.
Okay, but how can you solve this? When I always think of ERP, I think of it like a corporate open heart surgery. These are very tough and very serious implementations, and it's not like you do surgery with a magic wand. What can a customer do to solve that problem?
So at the beginning of projects, you don't know what you don't know, Ross. You have to start somewhere, and it's exactly the starting point that we looked into for many years. You often hear about starting with phase 0 of your project, but you don't often hear about version 0 of your system in phase 0. What we looked at is whether it would be possible to make version 0 of your working system available in phase 0, and not just the configured application, but also the customer process descriptions, the test cases, the roles, and all the other topics that the project manager needs to get aligned, all available on day one so that the project team can test drive it before starting.
So I'm going to think of myself as a customer, Bob, and say it still feels like you're waving your magic wand out there. How is that actually possible?
Yeah, so the challenge, Ross, is how do you in a very short time frame make a custom tailored system with all the project dimensions available that the customer can test drive and the project team can really rally around on day one? It sounds a bit like magic, which is why we actually provide the test drive for free, because nobody believes it's possible. It's like you say, Ross, it sounds like magic. So how is it possible? Well, it isn't magic. In recent years, many new technologies have emerged at SAP and in the SAP ecosystem that allow us to use AI and automation to create in a matter of days what would ordinarily take many months. We pour our team's knowledge from decades of implementation experience into intelligent automation, and have something like an automated implementation factory that can generate and regenerate a running system very quickly, usually within a week of receiving the information and data from the customer. We then train the team on their own system with a special focus on all the streams of work that the project manager needs to coordinate. They can then test drive the system, and from this point on, we can iterate and refine the system in a true agile approach. It helps you go much more quickly through all the steps in the project methodology. It's not a demo or POC that you throw away, but the real project development system built as an MVP that will now be refined to become the QA system and then productive. And so, Ross, we try to borrow from manufacturing paradigm rather than an engineering paradigm. Most ERP projects we have been on are engineer to order type projects, meaning you specify what you want and then start a project to build it. We're instead trying to provide a kind of assemble to order approach based on a stable, repeatable platform, and that goes back and forth to an automated factory, a bit like the car industry does when it builds your custom personalized car in an automated factory based on a common platform.
That's interesting. I can sort of see a bit of the car example because I have a daughter who had a Camry, which was very similar to the platform that they use for their on the Lexus side, a lot of shared components, and probably that same kind of analogy. But I'm wondering if you can give us more of a practical example, in the world of ERP versus, maybe comparing to cars. Is there more a practical example of, and maybe highlighting, how that brought the risk down for the customer and sped things up?
Yeah, so one customer we had been trying for 6 months to get requirements, specifications, blueprints together and to design their future system. They had the typical problems of getting teams on the same page and trying to align the business with IT, and had come to a bit of a deadlock in the process with some delays and no system. We got connected to this company and suggested what we call a front-loading exercise. We had a 2-day workshop with them and asked them to let us come back to them quickly with what we thought based on what we learned about their world. And we gave them their system and project tooling and showed them what it would look like. And we came back, in their case, it was 10 days. And they showed them their working system with their working project tooling. They were ecstatic, even though much still had to be done in the details. It completely revolutionized the nature of the ERP project from one of conceptualization and then implementation to one of driving first and then iteratively refining in a true kind of agile approach. And we have another example of a company who's not even on SAP. For them, it's an even bigger jump. So we're offering them a starting point, which ordinarily they would take about 9 months to a year to get to.
Very interesting. And on that sort of first project, did you have any idea of like what they thought about through the traditional approach, how long it may take, and did this really shorten up the project from how they saw they would proceed with the project, and how that might reflect in cost or lower risk?
Yeah, we were able to shorten the time frame of the project by at least 6 months. It was a shorter project. It was going to go over 18 months. and they were able to cut out a lot of the activities that were going to go into starting that, so we could get them moving very, very quickly, you know.
And so if I understand correctly, it's kind of they had spent 6+ months, and then they were going to save an additional 6 months on, at least on the back end, moving that forward, and a lot of the activity. So it's less, you know, implementation, be it their own people or the implementer, as well as less time in the project, if I understand you correctly.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And so here's a couple of other questions that I would think are on people's minds. So what about, you know, if I'm a customer, if I've already started an S4 migration, does any of this help me?
Yeah, so we also see companies that are deep in the project already, or even already live on SAP S/4HANA. Some companies look toward like next steps, like global rollouts or things. So this is an area where we also have a special use case for helping rollouts. Often on global rollouts, you have the problem that a global template is made, and the expectation is that this is copied and pasted into the countries or plants. The truth is that these are still full projects in themselves. And what we do with these customers is to front load the country or plant so that the rollout is less risky, faster, and less disruptive through early visibility, test driving. You know, we do alignment and rapid refinement. So there's many ways to use this.
And when you said front load, what do you mean by that? Because I often think of, you know, all the activities at the back of the project. Is there something you can expand on?
So we do an exercise which we call front loading, because we believe most projects are backloaded, where what we do is we try to bring a lot of the heavy lifting to the front so we can spread it out. And what that is really taking the data from the customer, putting it into a system in a very high speed using automation tools. So that this is really the secret sauce behind this is this very experienced team has poured their knowledge into these automation tools and has brought these, is able to turn this around and generate the system very quickly. And so what we do is the front loading exercise allows the customer to test drive the system before they move forward. And most companies don't even believe this is possible. So usually what we do is do that exercise for free so that we can show them. And then usually what we do is then move on to refinements of that.
Yeah. And I guess you mentioned earlier about, I picked up on the word complexity, and I think about, you know, probably in the R3 and our ECC worlds, you probably, I don't know if those were easier migrations, but the system was probably more monolithic at the time. And now we've got a lot of complexity with the cloud and all the different tools and lots of different choices. Can you comment about really how complexity is dealt with, or are these things just all of a sudden become simple projects?
Yeah, so risk really comes from not knowing what you don't know, and also from the complexity. So what we also try to do is to remove some of this complexity, firstly providing this version 0 system with a very simple navigation tool and cockpit that guides, that kind of holds the hand and guides the customer and the project team through all the firstly, all the project aspects of the project tools, so the testing, the architecture, you know, the processes and documentation, then directly into the SAP S/4HANA system itself. We also connect the documentation and the diagrams, like what you might see in Signavio and stuff. We connect that to the actual live system so that someone who might not know SAP very well can quickly and easily find their way through the system and even operate the system, even if they have never seen SAP before. This removes a lot of risk because you're immediately in control of all aspects of the project.
Okay, very good. And I had a couple other questions myself, but I'd love to hear if there's any questions from the audience. Please feel free to ask away in the comments, and we'll make sure that we can bring those together, you know, for Bob. And while you ponder that, maybe I'll ask, you know, Bob, one more question is, you know, where do SAP best practices fit into this?
Yeah, so many years ago, I did 2 projects at the same time with 2 companies in the oil industry. They basically did the same thing and were very similar. The first company said they wanted to change their company to fit the software, and the second company said they wanted to change the software to fit their company. It was very fascinating because they were on 2 spectrums. They were really serious about it. Most of the time you have a little bit of half-half. And I was fascinated to see how these very fundamentally different mindsets led to extremely different projects. So SAP was flexible enough to accommodate both, but the first company was able to derive many other benefits down the road and had a much smoother project. The second company, 15 years later, made a decision to re-implement because they recognized the lost opportunity of not using many of the best practices. So the reason I have always been impressed by SAP is not just that the software foundation is extremely powerful and flexible, but that companies can benefit from the experience of thousands of customers worldwide and leverage industry best practices. In fact, what surprised me most when I joined SAP was that most of the talk was not about technology, but about business processes and what patterns people saw in the industry. And the more that companies try to adopt best practices, the closer they can stay to standard and the easier later upgrades become. And it really helps when you want to leverage new developments, like we're going to see this with AI or automation, because they work best on standardized platforms. But of course, there are often special processes unique to the customer which can be implemented. SAP is very flexible to enable parameterization. If you need enhancements, there are technologies today that allow you to put those in a side-by-side format so that you can still maintain a clean core and benefit from future developments and easier future upgrades.
Okay, great. We had a question from Frank asking that working with a customer that is ECC, Oracle, and others, as probably often happens with acquisitions, is this approach usable in such a complex scenario?
Yeah, so like I said, what we often find is that nowadays when you do a business case to do an upgrade of your ERP system, I mean it's very hard to get these kind of these business cases through the board. It's really for it's not enough to just say it's a maintenance. Maintenance is ending. It has to be about many things, like moving to the cloud, moving to to in-memory, moving to new functionality, moving all the many things. And one of the things which is based on that question is, how do you consolidate onto a system? How do you bring systems together that might have come in from mergers and acquisitions and stuff? So I think if you have a kind of a North Star where you work toward, how do you bring all of the different areas together? And we found that in the approach of bringing it early very quickly, especially if you're going to SAP, of course, you might need to bring the Oracle people on board, the people who've been used to using Oracle, used to using other systems. We're doing one with a company who's using a mainframe system right now. How do you bring them on board very quickly and give them a version 0 so that they can move very fast into the future?
Great. And so the question is, next question would be, how can you deliver a working system in 7 days when it normally takes 4 to 6 months to get a POC in place?
Yeah, so that's that same with the magic wand you meant. It's not magic the way we do it. It's just that we're very blessed to have a team of extremely experienced consultants over many years who have poured over the course of the development of this company, poured their knowledge into automation that does a lot of the things that we usually do by hand on these projects, and really drives it much more quickly. In fact, what we usually do is we do that in a few days, and then we go over it by hand and optimize it, make sure the documentation is linked, and bring it in. So again, this system is of course not the 100% system that the company will be going live with. It has, like, if you have whatever your scope of processes, so your first, let's say 100 processes or whatever it is, we get them running, we get the org structures. Now the interesting thing is you can make mistakes in that, and we will make mistakes because we don't have that much time with the customer. But this is the point, that you start with a version 0, and what you want to do is get the differences. So it's like when you test drive a car, when you go to buy a car, they don't take you into a conference room and show you presentations of the engines and stuff like that, and then ask you to specify what you'd want. They just give you a set of keys and go drive a car. Now that car you drive is not going to be the car you'll buy. You'll come back immediately, say, hey, I want to have this different, I want a bigger engine, I want all sorts of different things to it. And so that's the kind of the dynamic we want to get to. Even if it's just a 30 or 40% system of what will be there, we can, instead of thinking implementation, we can think refinement of a base that's already there, which is right at the beginning of the project.
And Bob, we're heading to the end of our official 30 minutes here. There was a couple of more questions that we may not be able to get to, but I'm wondering in the final 30 seconds, can you summarize one or two key takeaways you want the audience to leave with?
Yeah, so I think we're living through a kind of a sea change. There's a lot of movement that's coming. It's an important time. I think this is kind of a once in a lifetime ERP opportunity to upgrade and really get a lot of benefit out of it. And it's critical to get it right. So when you start a project, like I said, instead of thinking only phase 0, think version 0. You wouldn't buy a car without test driving it. Why would you do that with your SAP, your ERP transformation? And instead of thinking implementation, think iterative, agile refinement. And instead of lots of dispersed silos and collateral, think of a transparent center of control from which to align everyone. And if you can get that at the beginning of your project, you can really speed things up and get a lot more value from the system.
That's great. Thank you very much, Bob. And my apologies for the initial technical glitches, but hopefully you enjoyed the conversation today. We will be making a copy of the recording available from the LeapGreat LinkedIn page for those that you might want to pass it on to somebody else that would be interested. And I'm sure Bob would always be interested in a reach out for those with additional questions, and we'll try for those questions that we weren't able to answer to get back to them one-on-one. And we'd like to encourage you to look to our next similar LinkedIn Live, which would be in 2 weeks' time, talking about global rollouts, and that which Bob mentioned a little bit here, but we'll drill down in that more detail together with a second guest, Tony Tomich from Ernst & Young, that'll be joining in the conversation. So we look forward to continuing to engage with you.
Thank you.